Today's Obon message will be given by Reverend Jigaku Takenouchi of Gila Taishoji Soto Mission. Reverend Jigaku Takenouchi is the 16th resident minister at Taishoji. He is a disciple of Reverend Shinsho Hata, the previous minister of Taishoji, who provided his training here in Hawaii. He began training first as a lay assistant and later a deacon before taking on the challenge of Hosen Shiki, or Dharma battle, and becoming a Hawaii Soto Mission minister. He was raised in the Catholic faith, but his interests in religions led him to explore different faiths, such as Wicca, Druidism, and Yoruba, to name a few. It was through Dr. J. Sakashita, one of his religion professors, that he was exposed to Buddhism, and later through Reverend Hata that he realized his calling.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Buenos dias. So, how is everyone today? Wow. Good. So, I see some faces that I recognize out there. Thank you for being in the audience. Every time I stand in public, it becomes more terrifying. But I am grateful for the opportunity to be able to share with all of you today during this Obon period. And I'm very grateful that I can share some reflections and some growth from this past year. Before I begin my message, I want to send my sincerest and deepest condolences to any of you out there who this year is a Hatsubon year. Time eases all wounds, but the wounds remain. Carry your loved ones forward with you, cherishing the moments that we honor them by bringing them back to us during this time to celebrate, to share in community with them. Very recently, and as recently as a few moments ago, I received this beautiful lei, and it is full of fragrance, and it gets me to thinking about my life over this past year. A few months back, we started to learn how to make leis at Taishoji with our Kapuna group, and we learned about different styles of lei. And it was so easy for me to go to Sack and Save or down to the farmer's market and pick one up, and they're beautiful and so cool and so easy because you just open the package and it's nice and cool around your neck. But as I started to learn from different members of the temple, they all had different styles of making their leis. Regardless of which style we learned how to do, the one thing that was common on all the different styles was that they are bound together. There's different layers to the lei, and the flowers that we see and are able to enjoy and smell are just the outside layer, but we don't see everything that's holding those layers together. So to me, as I sat during my time thinking about what I would like to talk about, I wanted to talk about life itself and the lei of all of our lives and how we are like this beautiful garland that we drape around our necks, all intertwined, all of our lives coming together to form the beautiful outer layer, never seeing the deep inside that holds everything together. There's also another connection to the lei, and this one requires a needle and thread or threading. And thinking of our Obon period and that connection, we recite sutras during our services. Sutras themselves are this connection. A sutra is something that we sew. The meaning itself is ingrained right into this ancient word. So it got me to thinking about the hurt that I felt over the last year. Some of them physical from aging. I am still very young though. 26? Yeah, 26 and counting for the 14th time. But we feel the aches in our body a little bit more as we age. And as I look out, I know that my back should not be the one complaining today, but it is. But it also got me to thinking about the suffering that we don't see in our lives, right? We have the physical aches, and some of them may become scars that can be seen, witnessed by others. But then we have those that are not seen. And to me, those scars, just like when we go to a doctor to heal these physical wounds sometimes, that's what coming to the temple during the Obon period has come to mean for me. It's looking at the threads of this beautiful garland of community, friendship, family, and love, and knowing that my thread is just one individual one that's connected to all the people who shaped and helped tie me along so that I may become a beautiful connection to my community. I often talk about my grandmother from my paternal side. If you've been here last year, I'll quiz you during lunch. But today, over this last year, I experienced some personal milestones, and it got me to thinking as I was learning that I didn't know too much about my maternal grandmother. And along this journey, I also had to go a little bit further back, and I had to learn about my great-grandparents as well. So I recently graduated from Oregon State University in religious studies. It was a passion that began when I began my training as a minister and my commitment to my community that I would continue to walk forward, bettering myself. And I decided through this program that they offered that it would be a wonderful path for me to be able to honor my ancestors. I, for the longest time, thought that I was a first generation graduate. And through a conversation with my mother, I didn't realize that my grandmother, her mother, was a teacher. She had her teaching degree and she was very well loved. And I remember going to the hospital one day across the street from the school in New Brunswick and seeing my grandmother at lunch and how people on the street would just wave to her and talk to her. My grandmother passed away from cancer, and at that time our family was a little bit far apart, so we weren't able to see each other as often as we would have liked. But on those special occasions when I did get to spend time with my maternal grandmother, I didn't know her silent struggle. She was going through this cancer, but she was still going to school every day, youthful, energetic, and she would come home recharged. She would stop for her treatments, and then the weekends would just become just another day for her, just another day to live. And that's all she was doing. living. But she was doing a little bit more than that. When the time came for her funeral, the cemetery was filled. And I was young. I didn't know many people. And if you speak to my mom, she'll tell you every time we speak on the phone, she'll mention a relative's name, and I'll say, "Who's that?" I really don't know them that well. But as I sat there with my family, I noticed that the people who were attending weren't older relatives. They weren't people who I was at a birthday party with. It was all of her students that came out to her funeral. And I thought to myself, later on as an adult, when I can process all of this a little bit better, how fortunate her life was. She never let on that she was suffering. She never shared personal stories of her students, but she was always energetic by the time she came home, even though she was struggling with her condition. And this reminds me of one of the qualities and one of the teachings of the Buddha. We might say it as Viriya, or maybe you might have heard it as Shojin. Has anyone heard Shojin before, or Viriya? It's the persistent, courageous energy that we manifest into the world. Carry on wholeheartedly and truthfully for ourselves. It doesn't rely on willpower on its own, but on the connections that we have with each other. And it's also the engagement that we share in this life. So thinking of my grandmother, thinking of this teaching, this was what she was doing. She was connecting with her world every single day. Now, as part of my studies, I also had a focus on Indigenous studies. And one of the things that we've kind of mentioned but never really spoke about was our ancestry. So we don't really place much emphasis on our ancestry in my family, but it did get me to ask questions as I'm filling out my family tree and realizing that I can't go much further back than my grandmother and maybe one great-grandmother with very vague recollections. But one thing that I do remember was during the summers, I would get to visit my grandparents, and they would take me to see my great-grandmother who lived on the land. This was the great-grandma that we didn't really talk about too much, right? She was out there. She didn't live in the city, she lived in the outskirts. There were no roads leading up to her house.
Wow.
She lived in a small thatched roof shack, basically. It would be probably maybe 3 pews put together by the length of the pews, very sparse. And we would see her, and she would see us as we were coming up, and she'd be riding on her horse. Yeah, on her horse. Brightest smile possible. One tooth. No lie, this is my childhood memory, so it's right, it's accurate. But I remember the one tooth, but the bright smile. And I remember my mom, my dad talking about how proud she was that even though she only had one tooth, she would not use like a finger scrubbing for it. She still used a toothbrush, and she was still very independent. She, like I said, she was riding a horse when she would walk up to the gate, and she would smile. And then afterwards, she'd go off and do her thing. Hi, I saw you, great, bye, kind of thing. And she used to hunt her own food, I learned later on. And I got to thinking about her unique lifestyle, right? So I'm a city boy. I would go to the farm, and that was as far as country as I would get during the summers, just to visit my grandparents. And now I'm seeing my great-grandmother through this different lens, through going back to school and learning about indigenous communities. I began to learn that the paper erasure that has happened in our history is still very prominent. It's still there. And what I learned was that my grandmother, my great-grandmother, considered herself a Taino Indian. Now, if many of you know our history of Christopher Columbus, you'll learn or you'll have heard at some point that he first landed in the Caribbean and those indigenous cultures which he had contact with ceased to exist. But now this narrative is completely being changed. We're learning that there's about 61 or about 85% of the Caribbean communities, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cubans, who carry at least 61% DNA that can be traced back to the Arawak and to the Taino Indians. So what does that mean for me? A Puerto Rican boy from New Jersey who everyone thought was Italian and didn't speak Spanish. Now I live in Hawaii. I am bilingual, striving to be trilingual, learning some a little Hawaii along the way, some Japanese along the way. But what this gets me to is the threads of our life, right? I never thought of myself as a indigenous American or an indigenous individual from the Caribbean. Yet my great-grandmother, just a few generations back, held on to that belief for her whole life and never let anyone tell her otherwise. I learned from my grandmother's struggle and how she decided to engage with life and how she, as a teacher, engaged with different communities, different ethnicities, different lifestyles, different backgrounds. And it got me to thinking, I've inherited a very powerful, unshakable connection to them. We might refer to this inheritance as akidana or seigan, to be able to accept and be gentle and kind living beings, but also to live with the resolve of our truths. When I was fortunate enough to go to my graduation just a few weeks ago, I was thinking not only of my grandparents as I held that diploma and took that picture, but I also had to be very grateful for the living connections as well. We always have those silent individuals in our lives who give us little nuggets of wisdom along the way. We sometimes have a cheerleader in our corner who encourages us, "Go, Sensei, you can do it. Good job." And then I've been fortunate because I've had all of those, but I've also had a very loving, caring husband who, when our journey began together, did not think I'd be a minister of a Soto temple in Hawaii. But here we are, and there he is. But supporting all along the way, close to my graduation, I always make absurd requests. And I said that traveling all the way from Hawaii, I knew I was going to receive a lei. And I saw this picture of this individual sometime back, and he was wearing, what do you call these?
Hakus.
And I said, I want one of those. quietly, little by little, he sat there patiently weaving my request. And one thing that I've learned, and I'll tell you, I still find this strange to this day, but we know we do it at Taishoji. You tie the string when you're tying the leg to your big toe, and you work outwards, you keep stringing it. So with a foot outstretched in the middle of Kupuna group, determined to finish my special leg, it was done. So now I have this beautiful connection of all these traditions that I inherited, that I'm learning about, coming together. And right before I left OSU, there's this statue of Benny the mascot, Benny the Beaver. Go Beavs. And two things happened while I was wearing my special regalia. The first happened during the procession where I was lined up with my religious study posse, our 6 ministers, individuals of different backgrounds. And the individuals getting their doctorates started the procession. They start walking down. And as they're walking down, we're cheering them on and they're smiling at us. And this one lady in particular paused right in front of me. She looks me up and down, nods, gives me the finger up and down, smiles, nods one more time, holding up all of the other doctorates that are waiting to proceed through, and then she carries on. Now, when we're reaching the stadium, we see that the doctorates are all lined up, waiting to receive us as we enter, and she sees me again, and she smiles, and she says, "You wore it well." So I didn't get to interact with her too much. It was just this unique visual experience between both of us, this one moment of connection. And she was getting her PhD in education. She's from Hawaii, go figure. So it just goes to show all of the threads that we weave on our little islands, how far they spread, and how far our lei of aloha, our lei of our lives, wraps around this world. So now we're in Hawaii, we're back on the island, and Obon season is now in full swing. Now, some days I thought if I lived in Japan, we would only be doing this for about 3 days. So, as I see my members come and go from the temple grounds, they tell me, "Are you going to this bon dance? Are you going to that bon dance?" And I'm like, "I just landed. I want to settle in first." But it's just so wonderful to see how even on our own islands, the strands that we weave, we tie them so well together. Our communities come together during this time of reflection. During this Obon period, I want to invite all of you to think about those individuals in your life who are no longer present. Just take a moment to reflect on the quirks that make you who you are, maybe the weird habits that you've picked up along the way, and think about the living, breathing fact that we are the lei of aloha that stretches across our islands and across the world, not because we are individuals, but because we are those who come together because of all the ones who have come before us to join us together. Without the teachings of my grandmother, the perseverance of my great-grandmother and her identity, I may be just a little bit more confused of who I am today. I know that I am a product of my parents and of my grandparents and of my great-grandparents, but I am also a product of my sangha, of my community, and of all the beings in the world who bring us together, who brought us here to Daifukuji on this Obon surface. So think of those loved ones, those breaths that you take because of them, and think of how your lei can just be a little bit shinier, a little bit brighter, and a little more fragrant for the lives we touch during our bone dance, outside of our bone dance, and in our everyday lives. Lastly, I'm going to leave you with this last image. When we dance around the Yagura, we dance in a circle, no beginning and no end. We truly are forming a human lei around the stupa of the Buddha's teachings, of the ancestors who become our personal Buddhas. We welcome them back and we continue to be a part of them and they are part of us, constantly weaving those strands in life. With that, let us put our hands together in Gasho and recite the name of the Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Thank you all for allowing me the time to reflect on my recent experience and accomplishments, and for being a part of your life today and throughout the year. I hope to see each and every one of you again. Thank you.